Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today we have author Wendy Van Camp with us, who's going to be talking about her poetry collection, which is scifaiku. I'm assuming it's haiku is and sci-fi mixed together. And her book is called The Plants, and she's going to talk about that today. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Wendy Van Camp. I'm an author and poet, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about science fiction poetry. Yes, that is a real thing. There's an entire community out there of science fiction or speculative poets. And I guess we're going to talk a little bit about my first debut poetry collection, which is called The Planets, a sci-fi coup poetry collection. And let me just grab it here real quick. This is what it looks like right here. The Planets was nominated in 2020 for an Elgin Award, and the Elgins are for Best Speculative Poetry Book of the Year. Um, and let's see. As for me, I've been a poet for probably about 10 years now. I've been publishing in magazines for years. I just recently edited a poetry anthology called Eccentric Orbits, which should be coming out any day now, which is a poetry anthology for speculative poetry. And I must say, I was so blown away by the poets that came on board for the project. It's going to be a great read. Um, and it's put out by Dimensional Fold Publishing. Um, and as for me, you can find me at No Wasted Ink, which is a blog for readers and writers of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I do author interviews, kind of like AF here does. I also review books. I have a top 10 writers link. And occasionally I write articles, and I have guest posters that write articles about writing or science fiction and whatnot. We've been around for, oh gosh, 8 or 9 years now, so we have quite a following on the blog. And I
Nice.
guess that's enough for now. Yeah, let's get some questions going.
Well, it actually sounds like you've got a full schedule going on, and that new book sounds interesting. I'll have to check it out.
Mhm.
So, first off, we'll start with the normal questions. Give us an overview of what the book is.
Well, it's a poetry collection. I've been inspired by NASA since I watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. I was a tender age of like 3 or 4 years old. I was very young. And it really gave a lasting impression on me. I became fascinated by NASA, about all the expeditions to the various planets and what they're discovering there. I'm very much watching the Mars rover right now. It's been just wonderful to watch. And so I've always really loved learning about the planets. And so when I became a poet about 10 years ago, and I was casting around for ideas of what to write poetry about, the planets was actually a very natural subject for me to pick. And so I started writing sci-fi poems based on various planets. I think my first ones I liked was Mars and Venus and Jupiter, ones that had a lot more information about them at that early time than than maybe some of the other planets. And then I think about 2 years ago, yeah, in 2019, I was I broke my hand of all. I took a fall and I broke my ring finger and my pinky. And even though I was slated to work on a novella at that time in my writing schedule, I couldn't type. And I was very stymied for a couple of weeks. And I decided, well, I discovered rather that I could hold a fountain pen and I could write normally with handwriting. And since I normally compose my poetry in a notebook with a fountain pen, I went, you know what? Let's put the novella on hold. And why don't I just focus on getting a poetry collection done? Because this is a project I've been wanting to do for years. Now, even though I've been publishing poems in magazines consistently, I had a regular column in Far Horizons where I would put out poetry. Probably they would publish me, if not once a month, bi-monthly. And of course, I was publishing poems in other magazines all over the place. Sci-fi coup, even though it's not something I invented, Not a lot of people write it. I think we kind of all know each other by now, the poets that specialize in it. And I found that because I wrote it, the magazines would call me. And so I didn't have to hunt around to be published. In fact, when I wrote my very first scifaiku poem and read it in a class, I had a magazine publisher come up to me and say, "Hey, I really loved your reading. I want to buy your poem," which blew me away. That kind of thing does not happen every day. So anyway, getting back to the planets, I decided I would focus my time that summer with my broken hand, and I would write about the other planets of the solar system. Now, being my age, to me, the planets are 9 planets, including Pluto. So in my book, I focus on Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So whatever your view on Pluto is, in my view, it's a planet.
Well, you have a agreeing view here. Pluto is a planet.
Yes. So anyway, I spent the summer in my local coffee house writing poems with my notebook. Baristas would come over and ask me how my book was coming. It actually became kind of a community thing. And it was very relaxing. I would set up a writing time of about maybe 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon. I didn't go every day of the week, but I probably got out at least 3 to 4 days a week. And I liked writing in the coffee house because my husband knew that I was writing. I wasn't there for him to ask questions of. And I wasn't being bothered by the phone or by my cat or whatever else was going on. I could actually sit and focus. And I actually belted out the book in about 3 months, strangely enough. A couple of my pre-published poems do appear in the planets, but not a large number. I would say maybe 5% of the poetry in there was pre-published, but all the rest was brand new for the book. And it's actually done well. I've sold quite a number of copies. I, of course, was nominated for the Elgin Award in 2020. I didn't win it, but the lady that did, who I know personally, I was very thrilled for her. And she had a wonderful book. So I don't feel all that bad, even though, of course, I would have loved to have won myself. And so it's going strong. And meanwhile, this year, I have been working on a poetry anthology called Eccentric Orbits. And I was a poet in it last year. So I published in Eccentric Orbits 1. And just on my own reconnaissance, I decided to do a little extra marketing for the book. I put it in the sci-fi database. I put it out to certain places that I knew so it would be more recognized. And the publisher was just blown away. He said, "Oh, wow, thank you very much. I didn't even know about this, this, and this." And all out of the blue, he says, "Wendy, would you be willing to edit Eccentric Orbits 2 for me?" And I kind of went, whoa, because I have never edited an anthology of any kind. I've put together my own collection, of course. And of course, I run my website and I have editorial calendars and things like that. But I've never actually done the job of an editor. And I thought, this would be a really good learning experience for me. And so I agreed to it. And it was about a 6-month project, but it's finally come to fruition. We're just finishing the final edits with the publisher. Right now, we're kind of proofing each other to make sure everything is done correctly. And I'm hoping the book will be out within the week. So that's been really exciting. Now, I kind of put scifaiku into this issue of my own, but instead I decided to group them as a single poem because when I write scifaiku for magazines, I generally will write 4 or 5 of them in a theme. And a lot of times I will title them, but traditionally scifaiku is not titled. So I thought this time I wouldn't title it. And then I thought, it's all one theme. I'm just going to put it all together as a single poem. And it looks really good. I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, that's one thing I had to think about when I was publishing my horror haiku books is whether or not to title them or not. I believe I went with the title because most people, they expect a title, I think.
Well, it kind of goes back and forth. I have this one guy who actually gave me a 1-star review on Goodreads. Uh, at the time, my book, of course, was nominated for the Elgin, which is a really it's an award you want. And his book was also nominated at the same time. And yet he was going around putting 1-star reviews on my book all over the place, which I really, let's just say, I didn't think that was very good of him.
Yeah, there's some sour grapes there,
My
I think.
poetry it wasn't that he didn't like my poetry. It was because I titled my poems. And he just wouldn't. He just flat out, no, anybody who's serious about being a poet wouldn't do that. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but no, I don't believe that at all.
Well,
I think if I was any way you want. If people
Yeah.
want to title, they can. If they don't want to title, they can. But I don't think that hurts the poetry itself.
No, I think if I was doing maybe something more like the Japanese haiku, the more traditional form of it, I would leave the title off. But I think when you're kind of melding the form into sci-fi or with horror, I don't think it matters much whether you title it or not.
Well, for me, because I put things out to blogs or to magazines, a lot of them ask for titles. And when you do a blog, it's always helpful to have one because then it works with the system better. But there are a few magazines that would prefer it not to have a title. And so what I do is I just send them without titles to those publications. If I use it again later, I might pop the title back on. But I try to respect whatever magazine I'm submitting to, whatever they feel is their format. So
yeah, you always have to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Always read the submission guidelines. Always follow the submission guidelines.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've mentioned that a few times in some of my advice videos. So yeah, people know how I feel about that. So I'm curious though, because I noticed there's a sci-fi coup. Sorry, I'm never going to get that right. On Twitter as well. Do you participate in that? Because that's where I learned about the horror haiku was on Twitter.
Oh, I know that Twitter, there's people that just put out poems like that. But I find that I would rather be paid for my work. And so I don't really put things out unless they've already been published. And that I've gotten at least some money from them. And sometimes I get reprint money too. So I don't tend to participate in just throwing my poetry out for free all over the place. I have to have some kind of return on it. That's just my way of doing things. And I mean, I do make money off my poetry. It's part of my author platform where I'm making a living. So, but people do what they want to do. Some people don't care. They just want people to read their work, and that's valid as well.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, I recycled all my Twitter poems into my collection. So.
Oh, there you go. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So I threw them out and made money on them too. Yeah. But I was just wondering if you were part of that community, because that's how I started in the speculative collection.
Not really. I actually was kind of all by myself, and for a long time I didn't even realize other people were writing it. I had taken a class in it at a convention. That's how I got started. I didn't even think of myself as a poet before that point. I think the last poem I had written was in high school, and that was like 20 years before. But for some reason, I tend to think in small kind of bits anyway when I do my writing. I'm kind of more of a sparse Hemingway than a Faulkner, so to speak. So the form really suited me, and I don't know why, but it just it really meshed with me. Whatever I came, even at the very beginning, turned out really decent. And as I learned more, and as I studied with people that write haiku and learned myself through self-teaching, I think my work has improved through the years. And now, of course, I'm trying to expand into longer form poetry as well. Oops, I think my camera is about to go. Excuse me while I grab the cable real quick, and because I don't want to lose you guys.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. We've had worse technical problems. So.
There we go. Sorry about that. What can I say? It's been one of those mornings.
Yeah. I've had those too. So I was wondering though, like you said, your haiku are all sci-fi based or space based.
Mhm.
So, and you said you were getting into longer form. So, are you going to bring those sci-fi themes into the longer form poems, or are you going to try something else?
Most of the poetry I write is science fiction poetry or astro poetry. In fact, a lot of my sci-fi coup or poems from the planets that were more astro poetry based were part of a exoplanet space conference last year, and my poetry was put up for all the astronomers from all around the world to read, which I thought was really fun. But yeah, I tend to write sci-fi. I consider myself to be a science fiction author. I am writing science fiction novels. I've done science fiction short stories. I do dabble a little in Austen Regency. My first book a is a fanfic, as you will, of Jane Austen's book Persuasion, and my book
Ooh.
could work as a prequel to her book. And book 2 of that series will hopefully be out by the end of this year. The next one is called Christmas in Kellogg, and it's about, let's just say, the romance Anne Elliot had with Charles Musgrove before Frederick returned. And a little bit about her relationship with her sister Mary as well. So it should be hopefully. I'm hoping the readers will like it as much as they like book 1.
Yeah,
So we'll
I'll
see
have
how
to
it
check
goes.
those out too because I love Persuasion.
Yes, yes.
And
I've gotten
I
good
do like
reviews on
checking.
book 1.
Yeah, I do like
You
checking
know,
out other people's versions of it too. So
yeah, yeah. It's funny about the Austen fics. They're very popular. But most of them are about Pride and Prejudice for some
mm,
reason. But my favorite Austen book was Persuasion. It was the first book of hers that I read. And I think the character of Anne Elliot really appealed to me. A lot of the loneliness and the family situations were reflected in what I went through personally when I was growing up. And I really loved her happy ending. And I love the real subtle growth of the characters. And I don't really compare myself as a writer to Jane Austen. Naturally, I have my own style, and I am who I am. I will never, I don't think I'll ever achieve her subtlety in character development. But the people that have read my book and have come back to me, because I sell it at tables, and so my readers will come up to me and we'll chat about my book quite often in person. And most of them really love the fact that I've captured a lot of the historical detail. I haven't modernized the story in a sense that people really feel like they're kind of back in the time period. I haven't followed customs completely because, let's face it, our modern time is very different from the early 1800s. And some of the things that were considered the norm at that time, people would really, I don't think they would quite understand. So, as an author, I've taken some liberties. I've kind of softened maybe some of the things that were maybe harsh to our sensibilities, and still trying to preserve the historical content so that it does really feel like you're back in Austen's time. And most people say that I was successful, and I'm hoping, like I said, book 2 will be the same way.
yeah, I really do think Persuasion is one of her best books. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
I do like it more than Pride and Prejudice. I know that's probably a unpopular opinion, but
Well, I don't know. I love all her books.
yeah,
I've read everything Austen, and I really consider her to be an influence on me as a writer. Um, Although, I mean, I have other influences. I'm a great Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. I loved early Robert Heinlein books because these are the things I grew up with, and it really did kind of form what I consider sci-fi stories. Larry Niven and his Ring World, I love that. I guess I'm more into hard sci-fi when it comes to reading, and I think most of my stories do have more of a hard sci-fi element, although sometimes I slip a little bit more toward the space opera too.
yeah. I've read the Heinlein Starship Troopers. I really like
Oh
that
yeah,
book.
that
Yeah,
was turned
there's some.
into a movie, although the movie
Oh,
really was
don't
not
don't.
quite. Uh, They
So
may have used the same names, but the two are very different.
yeah, I have very strong opinions on that movie, and they're not good.
Believe it or not, my favorite one is Half Spacesuit Will Travel, and it's about a young boy who wants to go to the moon, and so he works at a malt shop, a 50 style malt shop, so he can earn enough coupons to earn a ticket to the moon via our the technology in the book. And I guess he wins a spacesuit, and it's a crappy spacesuit, and he spends the entire book modifying the space book, or the space suit rather, to make it work and be more functional. And by the end of the book, his spacesuit is just so top of the line that his reward for his adventures, where of course he saves the Earth and all this other stuff. But at the very end, some corporate guy comes up and goes, "Dude, your spacesuit is the best ever. I want to give you a job as an engineer." I love that. That's what an ending. I really like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the
Mhm.
planets, do you have a favorite poem in that book?
I think my favorite one is one of the final ones with Pluto. And it's a poem that when I read excerpts from the planets, it's the one that I generally end my reading with. And if you like, I could pull it out for you.
Oh, sure.
I think I got it here somewhere, one of my little things. Well, I hope I do. Sorry, as you can tell, I was not exactly prepared to do that. I don't want to waste too much time looking for it. Wait a minute. I think I found it. All right. This poem is called Planet Pluto. In the Kuiper belt, dwarves mingle with comets. Size doesn't matter.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. I can see why it's your favorite. Okay, so have you ever struggled writing a poem? Just there's just something that you can't get right.
I struggled when I was a beginner poet. I always struggled. When I was writing poetry, if I could even do one or two poems a day, I mean, after hours of work, I would be successful. But these days, they just kind of fall off my pen. And even when I try to write other forms of poetry, I'm finding my syllable counts naturally come out in fives and sevens. It's when I've written. I mean, I've written hundreds. The Planets has 108 poems in it, but I've written many more beyond that on many other topics. So yeah, it's not so much of a struggle now. For me, it's more deciding what I want to base my poetry on. And so I keep a tickler list of scientific journals, and I save articles from those journals about topics that I think might be good to write poetry about. The one for Eccentric Orbit 2 was based on an article about astronomy simulations and the machinery that does it and how it works. Basically, they're modeling dark matter in the universe. So I wrote a series of 5 scifaiku based on that concept. And those are the ones I pushed together into one poem that I called The Long Journey. And but I do other topics too. I wrote poetry about bioprinting. I've written it about time travel. I did a series about tropes in science fiction. But the key thing is finding something that works with your brain, with your ideas. And I don't know why, but these little twist things just come out of me naturally. But I have to just kind of look at the article, seep it in, decide what the main idea of that scientific concept is, and then I try to relate it to something that's more personable for the regular person. I don't ever want to be using $5 words when a nickel will do. So I that's kind of my style. That's what I do. I know when I write longer poems, they tend not to be too grandiose. I'm not writing about the topic of the day, so I'm not into political things at all. I think that they're going to date my poems if I do that. And I like to write things that are a little more timeless. And what's more timeless than the stars? right?
Yeah, that's usually how I go when I write the sci-fi poems. I mean, I don't write sci-fi in the haiku. I usually do longer poems when I'm writing sci-fi topics, but usually
Mm-hmm.
stars and space and sky and
Mm-hmm.
those sort of kind of mind expanding topics.
But the thing is, even though we're writing about the stars and about science, which some people might think is being cold or distant, the trick, I think, to being a good poet is to make it more immediate and more understandable in an emotional way to the
Yeah,
reader.
yeah,
And
you
that's
got to
the
connect
key.
with emotion.
That is the key to speculative poetry, I think.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up here. It's a
Okay.
lovely conversation, and thank you for coming on, being our guest, and just tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Okay. Again, my name is Wendy Van Camp. You can find my books on pretty much any online retailer, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, you name it, I'm there. You can also find my illustrated scifaiku poetry prints on Etsy. My Etsy store is called No Wasted Ink. We didn't really touch on my poetry illustrations, but they are there. And of course, my blog is No Wasted Ink, and it's a blog for readers and writers of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I hope you all stop by.
Oh, sounds great. So, and I've put a link to her book in the description if you want to check it out because it sounds wonderful, as does her other blog and her store. So, check those out too. And again, thank you for being here today. And that's it for now. And join us tomorrow for another guest. So it's bye for now.